to this course on understanding the carbon footprint. In the last lecture, we talked about the carbon budget of the entire world. We said that the carbon budget, considering the global temperature rise of 1.5 degrees above pre industrial level, is 2,250 gigatons. So, what it meant was if we take a world as a whole, including the developed world and the developing world, then the world as a whole can emit 2,250 gigatons of CO2, and that is from the year pre-industry from the year which is starting of the industrialization era. However, up to 2020 we saw that we means the world has already consumed or its carbon budget, or in other words the world has emitted almost 1600 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, right? So it means that of the 2250 gigatons, we are left with only 400 gigatons, right? So only 400 gigatons of CO2 is now the carbon budget starting from 2020 onwards, right? So this is a gross picture. However, if you want to talk about carbon budgeting and climate justice, we need to go and dwell into the numbers much deeper. So the carbon budget, if you look from the perspective of the industrialized and non-industrialized world, we would find that primarily the six countries and the seventh group of European countries, namely the European Union, they have historically consumed the carbon budget. Uh, as of now, China, because of its huge population and tremendous growth, export-led growth, is contributing in a big way in consuming the carbon budget. So, if you look at the carbon budget historically has been consumed by the developed world, the industrialized nations, and it is now being consumed by the developed world as well as China. The limited carbon budget, carbon space we have used, okay, now has to be judiciously allotted to the other countries. Because if you don't do that, then it means that in the countries which are lagging behind in industrialization, they would not get anything to emit. It means that their industrialization would be in jeopardy. To understand this, we need to look at the figures of carbon budget more closely. So, as we said, that carbon budget is of which has been consumed is 1642 gigatons. Now, 1642 gigatons, who has consumed? So, if you look at it from the perspective of the period of time of the period, you will find that from 1870 to 1989, it was this European Union, UK, Russia, Japan, Canada, and Australia, and United States, which consumed 77% of the budget. Okay, so up to 1989, of the 1642 gigatons, 770 gigatons was consumed. And who consumed it? Mostly, about 80% was consumed by the what we can call as the industrialized countries, the United States, group of European Union, UK, Russia, Japan, Canada, and Australia. From 1990 onwards, up to now, okay, up to now means up to 2020 or 2019, the carbon budget spent was more than the carbon budget exhausted in the last century. Means from 1870 to 1989, we had consumed 770 gigatons. From 1990 up to 2020, means within a span of 30 years, we have already consumed more than what was consumed in more than 100 years. Okay. So how much was that? It was 872 gigatons. Okay, so look at this. From 1870 to 1989, it comes around 110 years. And 110 years, the world consumed 770 gigatons of carbon budget. And in the span of 30 years, the carbon budget was 872 gigatons. And who accounted for that? So about 50% was accounted or consumed by the name of the countries which already were mentioned, that is United States, UK, Russia, Japan, Canada, Australia, and the group of European Union countries. You would find that now the new entry into it is China, which consumed about 20% of the carbon budget. So carbon budget now, in the span of 30 years, about 20% contribution is now from China, which obviously is because it is a hugely populated country, and also it is developing in a greater sense. Okay, it is now leading a export-led industrialization. India, which is also another populous country, was consuming about 5% of the carbon budget in that period of 30 years. The difference between China and India, you would find that the population is almost the same, but China's carbon budget consumption is more because its industrialization was much faster. The growth rate of China was much faster than as compared to the Indian case. So if we talk about the consumption from 1817 to 2019, so the addition of 770 plus 872 becomes 1642 gigatons. So about 1642 gigatons was the carbon budget, which was contributed or consumed by historically United States, European Union, UK, Russia, Japan, Canada, and Australia, and that total those historic emitters, their contribution was about 60%. China contributed about 14% in that period of 130 years, 130 to 140 years, and India contributed 3%. And the remaining world, it contributed about 22% to the carbon budget. So you would find that the carbon budget exhaustion is directly linked to industrialization and the historic responsibility of global warming lies with the historic emitters. So this can be also understood from a per capita perspective. Per capita means per person perspective. So if you see the tons of CO2 or carbon footprint in 2020, then Australia and United States, they had a carbon footprint of about 16 tons of CO2 per capita. Okay, so the CO2 emission was about 16 tons, okay, every person, every head, per head. Canada was around 15, Russia was around 11, Japan was around 9, and South Africa was around 8. Okay, so these are the top emitters, of which Australia and United States, they are the highest emitters on the per capita basis. The carbon footprint is tremendous, 16. China, we said that it is contributing a lot in the overall sense, but per capita, its consumption is a bit less. It is about 7 tons of CO2. UK is almost the same as that of European Union. It's 6 to 5 is the range, and India is 2. If you compare this developed countries and developing countries with the underdeveloped regions, you will find that Africa, if you take, which has a population, huge population, in terms of 1.3 billion people, it is contributing minusculely in the carbon budget, or its carbon space occupancy is very less. It is only 0.8 tons per person. Okay. So this is including the developed part of South Africa. If you remove South Africa from the African scenario, then the rest of Africa, you'll find that the carbon space per capita is even lesser. Okay, so this shows that there is inequity in the carbon budget consumption. Okay, there is, on one hand you would have Australia, United States, Canada. In the middle part you will have China, UK, India, and on the other spectrum you will find that the countries which are poor, okay, underdeveloped, they are having a very low consumption. They are not contributing to climate change in a big way, but they would be, but still they are very poor. So in order to get another perspective, we would have a look at the carbon budget of United States of America. Okay, we said that if 1642 is consumed, 1642 of tons of CO2 is consumed, then we are left with around 400 gigatons of CO2. And now let us imagine a case where all other countries are not allowed to emit anything. Okay, only United States of America was allowed, it being a superpower, was allowed to consume the carbon budget. And let us say that there is someone in the power and who is very conservative and who don't want to cut the budget, okay, who don't want to cut down the carbon dioxide emissions. So in that case, what would happen? How long would the carbon budget last? So it means that using the superpower status of United States of America and shutting down all other energy consumptions everywhere in the world, which is again a very hypothetical sort of scenario, you would find that 6 billion tons of CO2 means, which is nothing but 6 gigatons of CO2 spent in 2020, means in 1 year 6 gigatons of CO2 was spent. And if the world budget is 400 gigatons, so if you divide 400 gigatons by 6 gigaton, every year 6 gigaton spent, it means that in a time period of 6 years, the entire carbon budget would be consumed. So imagine that all other countries are wiped out, only United States of America is there, and it continues to emit about 6 gigatons every year. It is not reducing its emissions. In that case, even in that case, for 1.5 degree centigrade pre-industrial level temperature rise scenario, you would find that the carbon budget would be completely exhausted in the period of 66 years. Okay, so this is the severity of this. Now, in order to understand that, how do we use the carbon budget concept for prolonging the climate change risk, okay, or for climate change mitigation, we would look into the carbon budgeting of one country in more detail. That is, we would take a case study of United States of America, and we would discuss that what is contributing to the emissions in United States of America, what it is doing, and how it can reduce its carbon budget. And if it is reducing its carbon budget, then it would mean that the world as a whole would have more years for fighting the climate change crisis. Okay, so in the next class we would discuss the carbon budget of United States of America. Thank you very much. Bye for now.